On March 25th, the World Trade Organization released its trade figures for 2008 and its projections for trade in 2009. While trade grew modestly in 2008, WTO economists predict a sharp decline in trade in 2009. With me to discuss these figures is Chief WTO Economist Patrick Lowe. Patrick, hello.
Hello, Keith. Thank you for that. In 2008, we began to see the problems in the second half, which ended up giving us a growth rate of 2% only in export growth, which was a lot lower than 2007, which was 6%. Now, as we go forward into 2009, we're looking at really rather a significant contraction. We predict that trade will contract by 9% this year. And that is the largest contraction that we will have seen for many decades.
What are the factors that have led you and your team to come to this conclusion?
Well, I think the first and most salient factor, of course, is contractions in demand, and the fact that these demand contractions occurred in a fairly synchronized way across the globe. So strong decrease in demand obviously feeds through into trade. Secondly, I think it's worth mentioning the contrast between the output figures and the trade figures, because predictions at the moment from various agencies on output growth are from a much more mildly negative number, maybe 1% or so. So our 9% is quite stark by comparison. And I think the reason partly for this, of course, is that output growth or production and trade are not strictly comparable. You see, production is really an income figure, whereas trade is simply a gross flow. So the gross flow will always exceed the income number, and on the upswing and on the downswing we see this. So already that will explain why export growth is more negative than production growth. An added factor, which I think is important, is that with all the vertical integration of production that's taking place in the world, also called production sharing, it means that many components cross frontiers more than once, and so they get counted in that gross number. And so when you look at these strong contraction numbers for trade, one shouldn't confuse them with income contraction, and one shouldn't confuse them necessarily with job losses. I think these numbers are large for reasons other than the fundamentals that are much more reliably recorded by the income figures. A third factor which has been causing a certain amount of concern is the absence of adequate trade finance. Much of trade, the vast bulk of trade in fact, requires credit in order to ensure the smooth flow of imports and exports. And along with all the turmoil in the financial markets, the situation with trade credit has also caused a significant problem for traders. And it's quite hard to know exactly what the magnitude of this problem is, but numbers of between 100 billion and $300 billion in shortfall are being discussed. The WTO has been trying to act as honest broker in this field, and so we have had a couple of meetings involving all the stakeholders trying to establish ways of ensuring that we can get credit to where it's needed and at a reasonable price. The final reason is, of course, more of a potential reason. It's something that we should be very vigilant about. It's the possibility that protection will rise. Early evidence on this suggests that governments are resorting a bit more to protection measures, but we still don't think that this is a major factor explaining what has occurred so far. And the challenge is going to be to make sure that this doesn't become a cause for choking off trade and for delaying the recovery that we all know will eventually come.
When you look at these projections for declining trade, is this something that will affect all regions, or are some regions more affected than others?
Well, I think it's going to affect all regions to some degree. I think Asia has been particularly hit so far, but I suspect Asia will also be the fastest to recover. Of course, whether Asia can sell its products in other markets will be crucial to the rate at which it does recover. I think in some other parts of the world, in some developing countries, the full impact has not yet been felt, and that's something that will come in the next few months. But I don't think it's possible it's clearly not the case that any part of the world is going to be immune from this.
Is it your view that this is bad news for development?
I certainly don't think it's good news for development. In fact, our projections suggest that of that 9% decrease in exports for 2009, the developing countries will probably experience a decrease of something in the region of 2 to 3%, whilst the industrial countries will have a figure of around 10 probably. So I think it is bad news for the developing countries. It makes their task of attaining development and promoting growth that much more difficult.
Thank you very much, Patrick.
Thank you.